Welcome to Dear Art Producer, a podcast connecting the photography and video community with art producers. Drawing on her agency experience some years ago, photography agent Heather Elder penned an open letter to art producers discussing the finer points of working with one another. This podcast takes that idea and will introduce you to different art producers, share the stories of their diverse career paths, explore what it means to stay relevant, and examine industry topics such as marketing, estimating, directing, websites, and more.
Hi, welcome to Dear Art Producer. I am your host, Heather Elder, and in an effort to share some different perspectives with you, I have invited Ken Zane. He's freelance art producer and curator for AtEdge to be our guest. I met Ken way back when he was an art buyer and working in Philadelphia at Digitas. He then moved on to Chicago, and we started calling him an art producer. I was so happy when he moved to San Francisco to work at Old Navy, and I'm thrilled he stayed when he started working with AtEdge. Ken has always been my go-to person to talk all things photography and industry, and he's not only a colleague, but a dear friend. Hi, Ken.
Hey, Heather. Thanks so much for having me today.
Absolutely. And I know that, I don't know if you know this, but you get the honor of being the first repeat guest.
Ooh, that's exciting.
Well, for those listeners who hadn't heard you previously, we did a special episode that was live with the ASMP with Susie Barabee she was at Facebook at the time, and Shayla Love, who was at Uber Eats. So there was some really, really great information in that podcast as well. But given what a good friend you are and how much knowledge and insight you have into the industry and your new position, I thought it would be really fabulous to have you back on. So thank you for agreeing and for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, why don't you remind some of our guests who may have heard this earlier or may know you, but introduce yourself a little bit. Just give us a quick little background for the people who don't know you.
Quick little background is I started as a photographer about 25 years ago. I ended up transitioning into production just by way of friends basically telling me that everything I shot, I produced myself, and I was very, very hands-on. I had a friend working at McCann Erickson who really encouraged me to pursue art production. It was also called art buying at the time. Ended up getting my first break at Paleo Communications, which is in Saratoga Springs, New York. And then from there, I went to Chicago, where I worked at FCB. Then I went to Digitas, went to Leo Burnett. And from Leo Burnett, I ended up at Old Navy in San Francisco, which is somewhere I've been wanting to live for over 15 years.
And I think that's what we became friends over, because you were so interested in moving here, and we always stayed in touch, and everyone was always trying to send you all those leads to get you here.
Exactly. And now I'm here.
We're so happy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, gosh, you have such an interesting career path, and now you're at AtEdge. Talk to us a little bit about what you're doing for AtEdge, and how that kind of dovetailed into what you're doing as a freelance art producer.
Yeah, it was kind of a natural progression in terms of working as a photo producer, art producer. I've established a lot of relationships with photographers and reps. AtEdge was probably a perfect culmination of all the areas in my background and people I know who I can actually continue working with. So my role for them is basically curating the publication and the program. So I'm really keeping my eye out for, non-traditional photographers who have a really strong point of view, a wonderful eye, and who are producing exceptional work that's cutting edge and inspiring. I mean, it's really important that when you're looking at a photograph, you're inspired, and that's what I'm really looking for. So I'm looking for that voice of inspiration.
And are you seeing any trends out there now that you're on the AtEdge side of things? I mean, you were always kind of had your finger on the pulse, obviously, of what was going on photographically. But what are you seeing now in terms of what's coming across your desk?
Things aren't as trendy as they were. I would say in the past, probably about 10 years ago to about 5 years ago, there was this interesting trend that was coming out in terms of color saturation, and people were playing with tones, and it was almost like this very hyper realistic grain to it. So the images were very heavily manipulated. I think now we're going back to a style that's a little more natural in terms of look and feel. I do see a lot of lifestyle work coming out. I think that's where people think the market is. So they believe that's what they have to shoot. But I don't necessarily agree, because if your personal style might be a still life with very strong lighting or certain textures to it, that's fine too. I think as long as the work is true to yourself, that's what's great. But I'm not seeing too much in terms of trends right now.
You know, one thing that I see coming across my desk a little bit more than I have been in the past is the traditional portrait.
Yep.
Are you seeing more of that?
Absolutely. And that's why I'm saying it's interesting, because I'm not seeing that hyper realistic work at the moment as we were a few years ago. It kind of went in that other direction where it was almost getting a little, I hate to use the word cartoony, but a little cartoony and a little stylized. And now I think we're, with the whole digital trend, people want to capture that feeling of old school film. So it seems that they're actually going back to a traditional way of shooting, but on digital, because now digital's been around long enough that you could master it and have it look like film. So that's definitely something I'm seeing, along with the lifestyle.
Interesting. And how about let's talk about the industry.
I'm sorry, and tintypes too. Have you been seeing a lot of these tintypes coming up?
You know, it's so funny. I have just a few of them, but it's interesting that you're bringing it up, because I was wondering if I was going to be seeing more of that.
I'm starting to see a lot of it, and now they're doing something that's similar to that tin look, which is called wet plate. And I've seen probably about 10 photographers doing that right now, and it's beautiful. Basically, you look at these photographs and you just want to frame them and put them on your wall.
Oh, interesting. Oh, if you have any favorites, I'd love to see it. Maybe shoot some links later. Okay, well, let's talk about the state of our industry. We have been going through such changes over the last, 5 to 10 years. Most, and I would think in the last more recent years, even more drastic changes. And you've been in different markets. You've been in Chicago, you've been in San Francisco, you've been on the agency side and the client side, and now you're on the photographer side. So I think you can speak so clearly as to what the challenges are from every end. And I'd love to it's such a big question, but I'd love for you to share with our guests some of the things that you're seeing that are happening out there.
I think what's happening out there now is that the industry is definitely changing, and I think so much of that has to do with social media. So basically how you're bidding a job now is pretty different from even 5 years ago, when there wasn't as much social media happening. It was just starting back then. So I think in terms of that, it's changed things a lot. I think clients aren't sure what they want to do with the images yet. So it's almost like you're put into a position of being forced to ask the photographer to shoot a library, as opposed to maybe 10 years ago where a photographer was hired to shoot an image for an advertisement. And it might be 1 or 2 images, and you know where they're going to be inserted and what the use is going to be. I think now it's pretty unclear what usage is, because it's all over the place. And unfortunately, that's just the nature of the industry right now. It really has changed tremendously.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I mean, so much of what comes across my desk is obviously a library of images, but beyond that, the list of deliverables has changed so much. It's not just, I'll have the hard drive, please retouch 10 images for me. There's complex video and motion work that's needed, or maybe there's some cinemagraphs that are needed, or, maybe there's imagery needed for social. And then if that's the case, then, there's different specs for Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook. And, and I think it's become a massive dance for a photographer. They really they need to know how to do that dance and be able to deliver seamlessly. And I think the other challenge too is that a lot of clients and agencies, because this is also new, don't always know what they don't know. And I think we're at a time where we're trying to make sure we all are using the language correctly. right? What is a cinematograph? What is a GIF? Is it the same thing? What's a moving image? Is that different from a cinematograph? Like, and if I have motion involved and I'm using CGI, what does that mean? Like, there's so many different ways to approach a job. And I find that the process has become so much more to create an estimate because you have to really define what those deliverables are. And sometimes the agencies or the clients just aren't ready to do that. So it's become harder to estimate. Were you finding that when you were at Old Navy?
It was different there. We were pretty much strictly working in marketing, and mostly I was at the print end of things, so I wasn't working with the video component as much. I think with social media, we were doing lots of GIFs, so that was pretty easy. But there is something about knowing what your specs are and what the photographer has to deliver. And sometimes the deliverables are 3 different variations or 4, and they all take time. So I think it's so important to put that into your estimates. But at the same time, I think there's so much information that you don't have at the beginning of a project that it's hard to really address all the final needs, because that could literally change the day of the shoot. And I'm finding that's happening more and more. Like literally a day before the shoot, all of a sudden they need 2 different deliverables or 3 different deliverables, and they have to be in different formats. So there's a lot of last second asks at the moment when you've already estimated for one set of requests.
Yeah, and I do think it's really important for the photographers who are listening out there to know that you really need to be able to communicate your capabilities as a studio and as a production team well, so that they have the faith and the trust in you to be able to get them what they need, even if it's a last minute change. And I don't know that they've ever really had to do that before, because they've just always relied on their images to speak for themselves, right? You hire me because you want me to create this type of image for you, and here's your layout, and now go do it. So I think the role of the photography studio has just really changed a lot.
Yeah, and what's really important is to be flexible. That's the most important thing, just to go into a project anticipating that there may be changes, most likely, and just to be able to go with the flow. And I know it's easier said than done, but it's just the nature of what's happening right now.
Yeah. Now, you and I have talked about this before on the blog. We've talked about it. We talked about it at the Facebook thing, but I feel like I can't say it enough about how important that creative call is. And I just think you're always such a good advocate for that. So why don't you tell us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's so important. I was actually just talking to a photographer about this last week. Creative call is so important because basically it might even be the first time where you're speaking with your creative director, your art producer, and they get to get a sense of who you are, what you're about, how you work. Generally, the process starts out where we're just looking at your portfolio. So there's no feedback on it. It's just our opinion of your work and how it fits into the project we have coming up. But once we get onto that creative call and we're talking about the project, we get a really good sense of how the photographer is going to approach it, what their sensibility is, and also just kind of get a sense of how they jive with the creative director and the art director and the team. Because remember, we could be working on a job with you for a day, 2 days, or it could even be as long as a week. So it really helps to get a sense of that person's approach as well as their personality.
Yeah. Now, what advice do you have for a photographer who might be a little bit more soft-spoken or, is a little bit quieter, less kind of energetic and enthusiastic just by nature? Do you have any advice for someone like that?
God, Heather, that's such a good question, because I've been on a couple calls like that. The advice is really just to get comfortable. I don't want to say practice. I hate to say that, but to get comfortable and just practice articulating your ideas to people. If you're quiet, but you're really enthusiastic about the project, that makes a huge difference. But I find when photographers are kind of quiet and not enthusiastic and not really asking questions or trying to find out a little more about the project. And the other two photographers we're speaking to are very excited, have a lot of ideas, and speak. Yep, it definitely
makes a difference.
Makes a huge difference.
I think coming prepared too, especially if you're quieter or more soft spoken, have some questions. It sounds really obvious, but having questions ready to ask, even if it's about what was it about my work that you liked? Were there any specific images that speak to you about this project? Because I've sat on a lot of calls over the years, and the calls where the client or the agency run the call and it's just basically taking you through the spec sheet are very different than when a photographer jumps into the conversation and asks them questions and talks to them about their process. And, it makes for much more back and forth.
Absolutely. Now, what could be helpful, but this would be going backwards, is if we receive the photographer's treatments before the phone call, because then we've had time to review the treatments, speak to that with the photographer on the call, and it kind of really helps guide the call. But I think it's a lot more effective and helpful for the photographer to have the creative call first, and then after the call, create a treatment. So back to your question before, let's say there was someone we spoke with who was a little quieter than the other two photographers and not as enthusiastic. Well, that treatment could end up coming back to us and it could blow us away.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's interesting because I think we would love the opportunity to have a creative call, create a treatment, and then have another creative call. That would be ideal because these people spend so much time on these treatments.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm talking hours and hours, sometimes depending on the project. And sometimes you feel like they go into this black hole. And, sometimes you get good feedback and people let you know that they've read them. But for the amount of time that's spent on it, it would be really wonderful to have a moment to take somebody through it, even a summary of it. And I wish that was a valuable part of the process for the agency and the client side. But I think obviously people are moving so at like such warped speed. Yeah. It's hard to fold it in. But that might be something I'm going to start asking for.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it could be really helpful.
I do too.
Unfortunately, just the time thing, I agree with you because sometimes there isn't the time for that. But what I will say is when I have been in situations where we've had an initial creative call and then we've had a chance to review treatments, if the creative directors don't have that much time, that final call might just be with the photographer who they felt that person's treatment, hit the nail on the head, and let's have another conversation with him just to make sure that this is the right.
Yeah, that's an interesting.
To go with.
We came up with a new idea.
Yeah, here we go.
Here we are. We're trailblazing. We're changing. And all the photographers and art producers are probably like, wait, what? You want us to do one more thing to add to our to-do list? Okay, so let's talk about getting your attention. Photographers have to get your attention as an art producer, but they also have to get your attention if they want to be in AtEdge. So what are some of the things that pop out to you, and where do you look for new people?
I look all over. I mean, I definitely review my emails. Sometimes I used to get tons of them. Now I get less, so it's easier for me really to focus on a photographer's work. So I might get an email, and then what I'll do is I'll go to their website. I'll look through their body of work, see how the website is set up. I always hope a photographer has like a personal section set up on a website because I love looking at personal work. I'll do it that way. I get photographers who email me and mail. Hard mail, it's mostly like single postcards. I used to get a lot of booklets, but I find people are doing less and less of that. The mini books were something I really enjoyed because I do still love print. I mean, I even love looking at portfolios. If a photographer has a portfolio and they want to come in and show me an iPad or a book, I'm like 100% of the time, I'm like, show me your book. I love seeing things in final printed format.
I agree. I agree with you. When we present at portfolio shows, and there might be a photographer who has a portfolio that's being redone, and we bring the iPad instead, it doesn't get looked at. It gets lost on the table.
Oh, it's true.
Maybe if I had a table full of iPads, they'd get looked at.
Yeah.
But I feel like the iPad is very similar to looking at a website. Like it's not much of a different presentation. If the iPad was like the size of a monitor, great. That would be very cool. But there's something about the printed book that really stands out and gives people that sense of nostalgia too. I think, like you said, like that they want that look of film again. I think they appreciate seeing it in print.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting is I'm finding right now more and more photographers, and in particular, I don't know why, but in the past half a year, are reaching out to me through Instagram. And it's really funny because I've never ever checked messages. I'm being honest now. I've never checked messages on Instagram until about 6 months ago. And for the first time, I all of a sudden realized that icon up there showing me I have a message. Yeah. So that's what I've been doing. And I think it's a really easy way for photographers to reach out to me. And obviously, they reach out to me through LinkedIn. But I have to tell you, that gets really overwhelming because I cannot even tell you how many messages I get on there and requests. And it's like overwhelming where I don't even have the time just to go through each person.
I wish there was a plugin that you could add to like Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn that just got you your notifications through email, and you just would have to reply via email. And it would just go through there instead of logging into the app, clicking onto their messenger service, their app, and then go. It's just harder to type, and it's just like, and it also pulls me out of what I'm doing. That might have made me sound old. I'm not sure, but but it's a lot of different places to grab information from, or monitor messages from, for sure.
Yeah. I wish it was a little more streamlined. And that's why I tell people if they have my email address, it's probably easier just to get hold of me directly through email as opposed to going through so many different channels. But I definitely appreciate the Instagram because then I can actually click onto the person's page. What I'm finding with Instagram now is when I started with it, I started it just as a personal page for myself, just like my inspirations, photos I like, friends, family, et cetera, et cetera. And now I find when I'm looking at photographers' Instagram sites, and tell me if you're seeing the same thing, it's almost like a mini version of their website.
Oh, definitely. I mean, those that curate it that way, for sure. Absolutely.
And part of like why I would like to go onto Instagram if I'm following a photographer or something, I would like to see some of their personal life too, just to get an idea of, their personality, what their hobbies are, what they like to do. If I wanted to look at their website, I would go to the website.
Yeah, I think so much about a photographer and their brand nowadays, they need to be able to pull from their personal life and share what all their experiences are, because those all shape their photography and their values and, what they stand for. So sharing more than just your photography with the people that you're on social media with is, I think, a positive.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's funny? I don't know if you've noticed this, but there are a couple of photographers who have wanted to reach out to and get in touch with, and they have an Instagram site, but there's no information on how to reach them. They don't have a website at all. And it's almost like they're using the Instagram in lieu of having a website.
Oh, interesting. Oh, yeah. I don't know. That's kind of like a given if you should put your website in there so you could be reached easily.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk then now a little bit about AtEdge, because we are talking about how to get your attention. And I know that AtEdge is a leading marketing program out there that is helping photographers to get attention. So you've been there for a little bit now. Why don't you take a second to share with everybody about what AtEdge is up to? I've noticed they've done some different things with their website, and what's on their 2020 plan.
Oh, yeah. The website's going through a complete overhaul. I'm really excited about it. That's one of the things I'm probably most excited about right now. We show motion on there, and we're showing the photographers. We're changing the navigation on it. We want it to be really well curated, beautiful, easy to navigate. Easy to navigate is probably the most important thing for me. I mean, as an art buyer, art producer, anybody looking at photography, you don't want to struggle through a website. You just want it to be simple, easy. Sometimes you don't have too much time. You want to get to what you're looking for. What's wonderful about our particular program is we're limited to only 150 photographers. So once we hit that number, that's it. So when you're going to the website, you're never going to see more than 150 photographers, which is wonderful because then you have an opportunity to stand out more as opposed to getting lost in a shuffle of maybe 5,000 people. The other part of the program, which I'm really looking forward to, I used to be at the other end of it, are our face-to-face events where photographers actually come in and they'll meet art producers and art buyers, creative directors, art directors, have a chance to really sit down with them, hopefully bring your books, go through the photographer's books, and it's a wonderful opportunity for them to talk to us or people at the other end and find out what works in terms of marketing. What is the best way to get in to speak with an art buyer or to have a meeting with a creative director? The good thing about this event is you are actually meeting all these people, but you can get further insights for the future. Like, what's the best way to stay in touch with you? Is it by email? Is it by mail? So those events are fun. It's going to be interesting for me this year because I'm going to be at the other end hosting as opposed to being one of the reviewers at the desk. So I'm looking forward to that. And
you're good at both roles, Ken. You're a great host and a great reviewer. So
thank you. I'm sure people will be still asking me to review when I'm there on the side anyway. And then the other part of the program is we do social media call outs. So we have the website. We have the 5 books that come out 5 times a year, the micro books and the macro books. I love the micro ones. I've always had them on my desk, no matter what agency I worked at, because they were just so pristine and well curated. I felt like I could never throw them out, and they felt like little coffee table books to me. So I've always kept them around.
Aren't they great?
They're so great, and they're so cute, and it's such a perfect size. Actually, for me, I prefer the minis to the macros.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're great. I like talking a little bit about, well, thank you for that. And for those of you who don't know AtEdge, definitely check out the program and give Ken a call and he can tell you more about it, and check out their website. I was on your site the other day and or AtEdge's site the other day, and it's looking really good. So there's a nice mix of motion and stills, and the way it's laid out look really nice. And I like how you can click through to the photographer's website really easily. So I thought that was a nice addition.
Yeah, I think that's really great. And the photographers I speak to, I'm always encouraging them. I'm saying, please make sure that, your personal link is on there as well, because, it gives people twice the opportunity to see twice as much as your work. And you could turn one into a personal site. One could be your commerce.
Yeah, no, that's great. Let's go back to talking about getting jobs, because I know, again, your experience is so varied, and getting jobs approved specifically. That estimate process is so long and
it's painful.
So hard and so painful is such a great word. And I know there's, so much involved on your end of getting an estimate approved that never existed, right? I would just hit send on the button on the estimate, send it to you. And sometimes you'd just go to the account person who went to the client and boom, okay, it's approved. But the layers that exist now in terms of the approvals and the time that it takes, not only, is that frustrating and hard, but it's also really hard because there's so much that can happen that's out of our control every step of the way, I feel like. Can you explain a little bit about all the different layers that exist now?
I think it pertains to which agency you're working with. Certain have less layers than others, but some of the agencies, if we're bidding a job, obviously, first it may have to go to the cost consultant. So the cost consultant is an outside resource, generally a vendor to the client. So the client hires this person to go through the estimates. And that's part of their job, and they really have to weed through and see where they could cut. Then some agencies have their own internal consultant on top of that. So it might go to the cost consultant first, then to the internal agency consultant. They go through that. Then it might go through a round with a talent consultant, and then it might go through a round with a business manager. And then once it's approved or not approved, it'll come back to the art producer. And then, like in that case, that may have been me at Leo Burnett. And then I would have to go back to you and say, hey, Heather, is there any way we could update or modify XYZ? And I would send you specific notes. And if it's something we could do, we'll work on together. And then hopefully it's approved at that point. But it's definitely not uncommon to go through sometimes as many as 5 rounds of that, especially if things are changing on the job. So if you set up an estimate for me that was based upon a 3-day shoot of print, and all of a sudden we're asking for motion capture, obviously I'm going to have to go back to you and say, hey, I need this estimate revised. So depending on the tweaks and changes that happen, that estimate could go through 5 revisions, and it's not uncommon. I've seen it done many times, unfortunately.
When you were at Leo, I really appreciated the pre-bid process and the attention to detail that went into every spec sheet that you guys would share with us, because I know it ultimately would lead to a firm bid. Did you enjoy that process as well?
I did. I think it makes it easier for the reps and photographers that we're working with, because there are less layers to go through. So it's a little more transparent, where it's like, hey, we need XYZ, and what would that cost? And it is going to be a firm bid. So let's really get it to the most realistic place possible. There are times where I might have seen an estimate that I thought was underbid, where I'll go back and I'll say, hey, I think you need to pad this a little bit, because I'm anticipating that, such and such might happen when we're shooting, and that we might need a buffer.
What is your perception about the estimating process from your end that you would like listeners to have a clearer understanding of based on your experience? Like, is there anything anybody's misunderstanding or they get outraged over and they shouldn't? What's a pain point that you have?
Yeah, I think what people, I love the word outrage. I think what people get outraged about, and this is why they'll overestimate. Sometimes if we're asking for a library and we're basically saying all use, and we may know that it's just not going to be on broadcast, so we might do all media excluding broadcast, and they'll come up with some crazy fee, but I know the images may never be anywhere except online and maybe at a bus shelter. And I try to let them know that, but they still feel that because you're asking for all use, that they have to charge, a specific rate, which might be really out of budget. And, unfortunately, as I was saying earlier, clients don't know what they want to do with images, but ultimately we do have a good sense of where they're going to be used. So I know if something's just going to be social media, web, email, and in-store, I'll let the agents know that, but we're still going to have to ask for all media. It seems that everybody's doing that, but to make people a little more comfortable, I'll always say excluding broadcast, so they know that's not going to be part of that beast.
Yeah, I do find on my end too, when I talk with photographers, not only the photographers in my group, but and just in general, talking about usage. Sometimes the conversation needs to be about the intended use. So while they are asking for unlimited usage, the intended usage might be something different. And of course, I don't want to underbid it. I want to bid it for what's right and what is the value of the project.
Sure.
But I think, especially with the advent of the libraries that have come around, we really needed to get our head around just pricing things for the value of a job. Exactly. And yes, the value of the usage, but you can't price yourself out of a job either.
Right.
When you're bidding multiple photographers for a project, which I'm sure is on every project, do you share who you're bidding against?
Do you know what? We've spoken about this before. Years ago, I did a bit, and now I don't, because I don't want to color the photographer or the rep with an idea of what they should be charging based upon who they're bidding against. And a perfect example that I'll bring up is I was bidding a job. This is years ago when I was at FCB, and the rep asked who they were bidding against. One of the photographers we were bidding happens to be a very well-known celebrity photographer. The other two weren't as well-known, but their work was equal caliber. And when the estimates came back, they had to go straight to the cost consultant. Well, the photographer's rep, who I told who they were bidding against, that actually turned out to be the highest bid, and the celebrity photographer was the lowest. And immediately the cost consultant awarded it to, obviously, the most affordable photographer, which was a very high caliber celebrity photographer. But I believe had the rep not known who they were bidding against, that estimate would have probably been in line with the others. So now I feel a little awkward about it, because I don't want to put anybody in a position of trying to second guess what the other person's charging, so they come in line with that. And I found, since I started doing that, when I was at Leo, I would say 90% of my estimates that I never spoke about which photographer was being bid against were all in line. So, which was wonderful, because it made it like fair playing ground, and it really made it about that treatment and that creative call, because the money was not an issue, because the estimates were all in line.
I've been doing the same thing. I used to ask all the time. Mostly I would ask from a marketing point of view, because you used to pick up the phone and call me and say, send me a portfolio. And then I'd have you on the phone and I'd be like, well, who else are you calling in? And you'd tell me, and I'd be like, oh, great. We're on the table next to some good people. I feel like that's great. And it felt good to know. It felt like, okay, the marketing we're doing is accurate. Like, it gave me information. You stopped calling me, you would email me, or you'd look on the website, so we wouldn't have a chance to have that conversation. So I felt like, this is my chance. I want to know who we're bidding against. And I also wanted to be strategic when we would be approaching a job. Well, that person does a lot of heavy post, or that person's not going to travel. But just like you, I started to realize, like, the rules are not the same. And if I start working on my approach based on another photographer because they travel or have post or whatever it is, I'm chasing a trend or not being true to my own approach. And, sometimes three photographers are called in because they're very similar, and sometimes they're called in because they're very different.
Exactly.
So you don't know that. So I've really stopped asking until after the job is awarded. And then whether we get it or not, I do try and ask, who were we bidding against? Are you able to share? Because I feel at that point, okay, that might inform the decision for me more.
Oh, yeah.
But otherwise, ahead of time, I've kind of stopped asking.
Yeah, I didn't really find it to be too helpful to anyone ahead of time, just because of the way it swayed the estimates. And I think that ended up, I don't want to say wasting time, but creating more work, because then if the bids were so off, you'd have to go back and forth for I don't even know how many rounds. But at the same time, it could also become a turnoff, because you'll be like, who's this person charging this much money? Forget it.
Well, and I thank you for that too, because I feel like you're somebody that I've had this conversation with over and over again, as I've been trying to formulate my opinion, and obviously a few other art producers and creatives in the industry, and my own photographers in the group who sometimes feel very differently than I do about this. But I think over the last couple of years, I've really kind of formulated this policy, or a point of view. It's not even a policy; it's like a point of view that I'd rather know afterwards than before.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah. Well,
because at that point, I think I know a lot of photographers, they just want to know who was in the bid at the end, because they're trying to assess where they are at a certain point in their career. And who their peers are. I think it's more about that. So that part I completely understand, and that's why after the fact, that's fine. But definitely, I love that we're both in agreement about at the beginning of a project.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not that important.
Well, we're almost at the end, and I feel like it's important to bring up, although it's such a big unknown at this point. Here we are recording on March 10th. So I'm not exactly sure when this podcast will air. My guess around the end of March or beginning of April. So it'll be really interesting to see where we are in the world. But with the coronavirus, I'm sure our industry is on pins and needles, and we're all wondering what is going to happen out there. What are you hearing from photographers? What are they dealing with right now?
I'm finding that photographers are being impacted by the fact that a lot of flights are getting canceled and delayed, and that's preventing them from working. And that's really difficult because so many photographers, like a photographer doesn't have to live or be based in one city anymore, as was a situation years and years ago. You could live anywhere in the world now, and you can travel to wherever you need to shoot. Unfortunately now, because of what's happening with the coronavirus and all these unknowns, many flights are getting canceled and photographers are having difficulty getting to where they need to be to work.
Yeah.
I don't know if that means people are going to just have to want to look for local photographers in the area that they're shooting. So it's going to, close the playing field down quite a bit as opposed to having 100 options. You might have, 4 options if you were shooting specifically in Florida in a certain region.
Right. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I know right now we're kind of being reactive in the sense that, we're calling our caterers and we're having them make individual wrapped meals instead of shared meals. And, there's no more, M&Ms on set where you're putting your hands in the M&Ms.
Exactly.
We're looking into live streaming options because some agencies have, banned travel altogether, or maybe they've just banned non-essential travel. So right now we're trying to be we feel like we're in this reactive mode to react to what the clients are needing us to do at this moment, because we do have shoots booked. I'm thinking ahead to, well, what do we do if production completely slows down? Will we be able to produce jobs? Will there be jobs for us to produce on our own? That would be great if we can do that. Will we use that time to work on our websites and think of new tests and maybe, record more podcasts. So it'll be interesting. I really don't have any predictions, obviously. I do think we are a resourceful industry, and everything we've ever done, our whole careers have prepared us for something like this, I think, in terms of trying to figure out how to be nimble and how to be resourceful. So I think we will, be a resourceful and supportive group of each other, that for sure.
Absolutely. I know a lot of people are encouraged to work from home.
Yeah, it's funny. I work from home. I have my office is separate from my house, but it's here. So I laugh because I'm like, okay, well, I'm going down to work like I do every day.
So true. And I'm getting used to working from home now too.
Exactly. That's so funny. Okay, well, Ken, as usual, it's so amazing to have you as a guest and to have you as a friend and to hear all your insights. So thank you for being so selfless with your time and always being a supporter of the industry, because you've really helped move it ahead, and, you keep us current, you keep us in check, and you really give everybody a lot of things to think about. So I wanted to make sure I said thank you for that.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, Heather, you've done so much for the photography community, and you're so well respected and appreciated. So thank you for doing everything you do.
Thanks for listening. In an industry where the rules are always changing, it's helpful to hear from those on the front line. Heather Elder is the visionary behind notesfromarepsjournal.com. Visit her website for industry updates, stunning photography and video, and the artist behind the work.